Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Tonight's show, as always, we have kind of three parts. So we're going to think a little about some of the issues and insights raised by previous guests. So things that really struck with me and some of our listeners earlier episodes in this series. Then we're going to explore an area that's of particular interest to Damien and the issue that we've kind of been sharing when promoting tonight's show, which is, of course, what is school's proper place in the smartphone debate? So perhaps schools should focus on staying in our lane and focusing on teaching and learning and supporting young people. Maybe some of the hyperbolic discussion around the dangers of screens is overblown and will die down. Or perhaps we've got a role to play in shaping the conversation and decisions that parents, governments, and young people themselves make about how and when to access and use this technology that's proven somewhat glitchy already this evening. We'll find out more about that in a while. Really pleased tonight to welcome Damien Whitbeath, who is a respected and experienced school leader, been working in schools in England for the last 20 years. Started out, I believe, early in his career as the founding head teacher of a primary school that went on to be praised for, in particular, its impact on social mobility and won several awards. He then moved into a role leading a range of schools, working with ARC academies, and now is head teacher of John Wallace Academy in Ashford, who you may have heard of in either the EduSphere or perhaps mainstream news, because they were one of the earliest schools to adopt lockable phone pouches, which proved both controversial and hugely popular online. Damien, have I missed anything?
No, that's a very nice introduction. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I guess we'll kick off by going straight into our questions. And these are just issues that previous speakers have kind of shared with us in no particular order to them. We may kind of dally or tarry on them if they're intriguing. We may move on quickly. But a couple of weeks ago, Dan Borman told us that he thought homework was unfair and probably unnecessary if we teach well enough. As a head teacher, do you agree?
I mean, the homework question is a great one, because the research is quite clear that for secondary age children, it doesn't necessarily have a huge impact on their outcomes. So if you're just following the research, then I'd agree with Dan's statements that for those children who can do the work, then they're fine. They don't need to do more, and those who can't, they haven't got the access to the support they need, and therefore doing extra homework is going to be tricky for them. So therefore it could be seen as being unfair. And we implemented a model in our school where we removed homework and made it so that it wasn't compulsory, and there was lots of additional knock-on consequences for this, such as parents' view was that the school no longer saw independent study as necessary, and the message that gave off was really counter to what we were trying to achieve in trying to create children as independent learners. So I think it's more nuanced than just kind of homework's good or bad. I think it's really important that you take your context into any thought process. I know what the research says. The research says that it doesn't have a huge impact, but certainly in terms of setting norms and in terms of encouraging children to take responsibility for their own learning, to do independent study, to get into good learning habits, I think there's a place to play for homework.
That's really interesting, and because there's another of our recent guests, and his question hasn't yet made it into my list that I share with guests ahead of time, was Matt Evans, who has worked as a head teacher for a long time. And his observation kind of, I think, links a little to what you were just saying about, well, the research says this, we then did this, and the consequences were surprising. So his take on running a school is that some of the systems that we oversee, they're kind of too complex to fully know, let alone control, and we kind of tamper with them at our peril. So does that resonate with your homework experience? Am I on the wrong line entirely there?
No, I think exactly that. I think if you were just to be able to isolate a single part of a school, such as homework, then I can fully see that, it makes a lot of sense. If a child can do the work, they don't need to do more of it. If they can't do the work, they need some adult support. Therefore, homework as such is unfair. But by removing it, by making it that so it's not compulsory, you take away something from the school's culture. You take away something from the experience of school, and you remove that. You have unintended consequences to your actions, and I think all of these things are really important. Making decisions.
And that implicit messaging is an interesting, and perhaps we'll come back up when we think about significant steps I know that your school's taken with smartphones as well. So another question I'll pose, and then there'll be a brief pause while I refer to our sponsors, was again, recent guest Dan talked about how teaching science has become trickier in the current political climate. So I'm interested in how else do you think perhaps leading or being a successful school has changed in recent years? So whilst Damien's thinking a little more on that question, it allows me a neat segue to share with you, of course, tonight's sponsors, who are John Catt Educational Publishers, who produce a range of books around professional development and resources that support great teaching and learning in our schools around the world. You can take the chance to level up your professional development today and visit the johncattbookshop.com. John Catt is spelt with 2 T's, and explore the full range of titles. Now, you can use the code JCTTR2425 for a 20% discount, and you may find on there a book called The 9 Pillars of Great Schools, which I know Damien took a hand in as one of the 3 primary authors. So perhaps that links, or perhaps it doesn't, to our question. So return. First, thank you for waiting there, Damien. How has leading a school changed in recent years?
That's a really good question. I think in recent times, school leadership has, one of the big challenges I think that all schools are facing is the real need to encourage students to question, to engage in thoughtful and meaningful debate without shutting people down, without closing people off, without this whole cancel culture, people you don't agree with. And I think when they look around the world, they see a very binary based system where you are either right or you are wrong, and you are either in or you are out. And I think that makes debate and nuance a really difficult thing to teach, because children's experience of the world around them is not nuanced. It's very black and white. It's very right and wrong. It's very you're in or you're out. And I think that's got really tricky in recent years.
Thank you. And again, I think that's a useful pre-echo to our exploration of the smartphones debate. That whole polarization and creating binaries perhaps isn't unrelated to the way that we consume information. So we'll return to that in a little while. And then before we jump into that, we've got a couple questions about schools as a whole, and great to have a chance to ask a experienced and successful school leader a bit about your take on these questions. So one of them comes from Martin Griffin, who in his episode of this show, we focus particularly upon the idea that schools are kind of story-making factories or storytelling factories. What do you make of that statement? Does it resonate, or is it perhaps unrelated to your experience of school?
So I don't know, Martin, but this is one of my favourite definitions of a school. The idea that it's a story-making factory is a beautiful concept. If you think of the fact that I've always got knowledge through stories, and that's the way we have done things for many years, for many generations, the idea that a school is somewhere that can pass on stories as like a storytelling factory is just a wonderful idea. So I love that quote.
Well, that's really helpful, and a useful chance for me to mention that if you do want to listen back to that episode, then I'll share the link to it after this show. And then lastly, I had the chance to interview Neil Gilbride, who is a psychologist and teacher trainer, a couple of weeks ago. I keep saying a couple of weeks, I feel it, maybe it was a month, who knows. But he's recently written a piece on, or a book on, self-efficacy theory, and thinks that schools should design and teach courses with self-efficacy in mind. So to kind of create this condition or scenario environment where students quickly learn about their capacity to learn things, which means they learn that they can achieve a particular standard in a particular domain. Does that apply to your understanding of your role as a school and what you're aiming to achieve, or is there something you'd like to clarify or add in there?
No, I mean, I haven't come across this before from Neil, so I'd love to read more around it and find out more. So this might be one that I'll have to come back to you on and inform myself and get myself more up to speed with it, because I'd need to dig into it more and find out more about
Okay,
it.
well, thank you, Damien. That's really helpful. And I think we're ready now to launch into the second kind of section of our show, where we explore a big idea that's important to you, you've thought about, that you're investing time and energy into. And I'm really impressed that alongside the not insignificant task of running a large secondary school, you've also put a lot of time and effort into work around an issue important to you, which is smartphones. So why are you doing this?
I was talking with my chair of governors today about this topic. When we started this whole process over 18 months ago, I genuinely did not realize the impact that removing smartphone from the schools would have. And I say that having, I know that phones are a distraction, and I've known for a long time that having them in schools is a bad thing, and they will detract from learning. We had a phone ban in place, and we were constantly reminding staff, constantly trying to find ways that the children weren't secretly sneaking a look at their phone. And it felt like one of those endless tasks that every term we'd write to parents, remind them of the rules, we'd give a big assembly and remind students. And we stumbled across lockable pouches almost by accident, and implemented what we thought was a fairly sensible scheme. And I've been a school leader for a long time, and there's very few things that I would say are transformational. But this process of removing the phones from the school genuinely changed the whole school culture. It led to significant improvements in student behavior. They were talking more, they were laughing more, engaging more. It made the relationships between staff and children better. And I'll go into more details. And having seen that this very simple act of a way of implementing a policy that most people agree on, that 90% of schools say that they have a phone ban, so most people think this is a sensible idea. We happen to come across a way that you could do it and make it effective. So I felt we had a duty to share.
Okay.
And since then we've been sharing.
So yeah, I've noticed this, and I think there's actually a lot in your answer I'd like to kind of break down a little, and then we'll kind of get into the detail there. So first of all, it struck me that this is kind of the opposite side of the coin to your homework question, where you said, well, the research said this, so we did that, and the impact was different than we thought, and it wasn't great. And now you mentioned we didn't plan it to go quite as it has. We didn't know the impact it would have. So we're going to have to think about that a little, to think about, well, the impact you're reporting is significant, but you also had a reason to make the decisions first of all. So we want to think a bit about that. And then a little bit perhaps about why the phone ban wasn't working and what some of the collateral kind of issues were there. So let's go back first of all so from the outside, it looks like quite a quick success, and you've led with it. It wasn't planned exactly like this. So when you were first decided to, okay, we're going for lockable phone pouches, what did you think And then at that point, what was the case in your head against having access to phones in schools at all? So that's changed a little over time.
So if we kind of rewind nearly 10 years, I did quite a lot of work with Tom Bennett when he was giving talks on behavior. And even 2015, 2016, we were talking about the impact phones were having on schools, and we were saying these phones have a negative impact on learning. And even having a phone, the London School of Economics did some research on this in 2016, and so we've known for a long time that phones are a bad thing. What I was experiencing in the school was this kind of really negative cycle of asking staff to implement a policy that was nearly impossible to implement. And the reason it's impossible to implement is that you cannot have eyes on every single student 24/7 in a large secondary school. We've got nearly 2,000 students. And there will be times where they do not have adult supervision. And a great example of one of those times is when they go to the toilet. Now, if they have access to completely unfiltered access to all of the things on the internet in their bag, and the only thing stopping them from accessing that is a rule that says, we don't want to see you with your phone out. Please don't put your hand in your bag and take it out. When you've got children with developing brains and they are kind of growing and they're exploring, and the whole thing about teenagers is that they push boundaries, they're learning what's safe, and they're pushing boundaries and seeing what they can get away with. The concept that they would not have a look at those phones is setting those children up to fail, and teachers felt that they were being set up to fail as well. And it was this constant negative cycle that we were facing.
So that seems like a strong reason to make a change. I have to declare a little bit of kind of interest in this as well, because I in the school I work in, we've worked hard on the same issue. So I feel that I should mention that, but also point out that as the kind of interviewer, I want to kind of give a little balance. So if I was more critical, perhaps than I am, I might think, okay, this is a problem, but are we not taking away those young people's chances to learn how to manage something they will need to learn to master? So do you have a response to that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the whole debate around phones, a lot of people have said for a long time that they have educational value, and shouldn't be teaching children to learn how to engage with it. And I think that's a really difficult and unfair argument. And if we're setting children up to fail, if we're setting them up with unrealistic expectations, where we're asking them to have so much self-control that they won't access something that the vast majority of adults can't themselves show self-control, show restraint, then we're asking young people. And I also think that when we look at some of the data out there, I know you said that some of the arguments are out of proportion. When we've got 75% of teenage girls being sent inappropriate images of body parts of people they don't know or don't even want to see images of, then that's a real problem. That isn't something you can do. That isn't an exaggeration. That is something, it's a safeguarding concern. And schools need to take that seriously.
Thank you. So we've got, your take is that the argument that young people should control it is overly simplistic, and some of the impacts of these phones is greater than, isn't reversible. So being exposed to ideas kind of too early is an issue. You've mentioned the impacts upon learning as well. So you had a strong case for removing phones, and then you introduced these lockable pouches, and you've outlined that the impact has been really significant. So let's explore a bit some of those impacts, so things that are different in your school now. So are we a year into the process, year and a bit?
Yeah, we are now. We started in January of last year, so we're 7 terms in.
Okay, so if I came into school today, or was a student in your school now, compared to 8 terms ago, what are some of the differences?
So we've seen that fairly consistently, less disruption in lessons. We've seen that in terms of when we track the behaviour logs and we look on the behaviour records, we're seeing significantly fewer incidents of lessons being disrupted, and therefore detentions for disruption in lessons. We're seeing about 75% less truancy during the day. So one of the things we've discovered, and we've just done a lot of work talking to the students about what we're seeing, but one of the things that we have really noticed is that we had children who were attending school but not necessarily attending all of the lessons, and we've since learned that they would go into the toilets and they would send a message to friends, or they would watch the next episode of whatever it was that they were watching on Netflix instead of going to the geography lesson, for example. And you know, they have reduced significantly. We have seen a huge dip in the number of online safeguarding incidents. So incidents of bullying and harassment taking place outside of school, which is where most of these things happen, has reduced by 80%. It's been huge. So the children are seeing a very real difference in the school itself. And if you actually speak to them, we asked them at the start of September of this year, if you could go back now and we could let you have phones again, would you want to, reverse this process? And only 11% said yes. 57% said they prefer it how it is now. They much prefer the fact that they are learning more, they are engaging more, they're talking to their friends more. And I think the other 40% were just kind of shrugged.
That's really interesting because
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
Hi secondary school teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering maths circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy...
I know initially responses can be quite negative to having something like access to phone taken away. So you're saying just over a year in, well, September was four terms into the process, students themselves were saying, this is better. Do you think am I not giving young people enough credit by assuming that of course they desperately want access to phones and think they're a good thing?
No, when we first announced it, they thought we were joking, and then they got some of them say they actually felt physically angry that we were going to take these things away from them. And we did see in the first few weeks, we saw children with, what you'd describe as withdrawal symptoms. If a student had their phone, one of the rules we have is if you have your phone out, if it's seen, it will then be confiscated and your parent needs to come and collect it. And we would see incidents of children really, really upset if they couldn't access their phone. And that has stopped now. We don't see that as regularly. The children know now the culture. Lots of people say there's ways around pouches. You can break into them. There's lots of things you can do to get the phones out. But actually, once you've created a culture where phones aren't the norm, then there's no point a child accessing their phone because none of their friends are using them. So they've got no one they could call, even if they do bring a calculator in the pouch instead of a mobile phone, because all the rest of their friends have got their phones locked away.
Okay, this is a really interesting picture we're shaping. We're going to look a little bit about the challenges of implementing it and making it work in a second. Something else I've heard you mention or read you kind of refer to before is that lunch times and break times are really different. And that seems really important to me. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, we noticed we noticed that lunchtimes got a lot louder in the restaurant because children were actually talking more, they were engaging more. We saw cards return, so children started playing Uno and bringing in chessboards. We noticed them playing games like Tick and Tag, and really reverting back to childhood type games. And actually, when we stopped and thought about what we were seeing beforehand, we were watching children who were very isolated. We'd usually sit on a table with one or two other children with bags on the table. We've since learned that underneath those bags, usually there was a phone. So they were more interested. It's amazing what you learn once you start speaking to the students about what they used to do. The more we've kind of learned about this, the more we're seeing simple things like children. We notice kind of children engaging more in larger groups and learning the social dynamics. Teachers said that they found that children were more polite and were opening doors, and that's because they were connecting with the community they were in rather than waiting for their phone to ping and waiting to see what's happening online.
So big changes there, and I think kind of reflecting back on our earlier kind of version of schools is this kind of storytelling factory. Those daily experiences of interacting and game playing and social times repeated daily for 6-7 years perhaps, that seems like a really big deal. So I suspect, particularly kind of given adolescence and other recent shows and publicity around going phone free, there might be people thinking about, well, could we make this work in our school? And it may or may not be appropriate to do so, but if they were going to, or perhaps going back to your own context, if you were going to do this again, so you're going to start from scratch, what would you do to make the switch to going to these lockable pouches work as well as you could?
So there were a few things that we got right by happy accident. I think if I was to go back and do this again, I would have done it a lot sooner. I would have stopped trying to enforce a policy that we could see wasn't working. And I think some of the data that's come out in the last 6 months has been reassuring that it wasn't just us. You know, when you see 90% of schools saying there's a phone ban in place, and yet 60% of teachers say they saw a phone out last week, you know that policy doesn't work. And I think it's really unfair of us on teachers. It's really unfair on the children themselves to keep trying to enforce a policy that we know doesn't work, that we now have very clear evidence. You know, that people talk of a lack of evidence, but we can see this. We know this policy doesn't work. I would have done it sooner is one thing. I think the other thing we did by accident was when we announced we were going phone free, a large number of our parents said that they would take this to the press, would take it to Ofsted, how we were infringing the children's human rights, and actually that gave us the feeling of, well, we'll take this to the press and we'll tell this as the story we want to tell, which is a positive one. And actually, I would encourage anyone who's doing this to own the positive story, to not be afraid of saying, this isn't a punishment. We're not doing this to harm children. We're doing this to give children back their childhood. And this is a really positive thing. And your children will be happier. They will be less isolated. They will feel less anxious. And we've even found that in the evenings, children are now saying they use their phones less in the evenings because of what's happening in the school during the day.
Thank you. That's really interesting. There's a lot there. And I know you're kind of really an advocate for going phone free. I wonder if you have a thought on what the best arguments are against it. And of course, we welcome questions from listeners as well if they want to jump in here. What do you think the best arguments are against a school going down the line that you have done?
So I think that having said that we live in a world that's binary, I'm so passionate about this. I do feel that it's a safeguarding risk to give children open access to the internet. I think it is that simple, that this is a risk. But one of the reasons for not implementing a nationwide ban would probably be the fact that it would be, if people are told you have to do something, if schools are told you have to do it this way, and they haven't bought into it, it's very easy to do something wrong. And lots of the national initiatives where people have been told you have to do it this way will work in some schools and won't work in others. And I'd hate for a system, a process that works really, really well to fall down because there wasn't buy-in from either the leadership team or the school itself. I think we need to help people to see the positives and to make a choice to go phone free. I think that would be the argument for not mandating a national ban, as it were.
Okay, and you mentioned there that it's important that schools are kind of on board with this sort of move. So I don't know if in your experience you found some staff were hard to convince, and if you have any thoughts upon why they may initially, at least, maybe they've changed their minds, maybe they haven't done, thought that the ban wasn't the right thing to do, or is that not something that came up in your context?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you think of it from a teacher's point of view, most schools and most teachers in schools have been in schools now for a long time. You know, we've had mobile phones for over 10 years. And what we know is that most policies are not effective and children still have access to their phones. So teachers' memory of and their own experience of being on in schools is a policy around phones that doesn't work. So it's only natural if a head teacher says, we're going to do something different and it's going to work this time. You know, they would have heard that every single September for the last 10 years. So I would expect almost that teachers would approach this with a, you know, let's see if this works, and they would wait and hopefully, you know, they would withhold judgment until they see it. I think the experience that teachers will find is likely to be similar, because when you remove the phones from children when they do not have that access to it, then all of a sudden you open up a whole new world of learning opportunities for them.
Okay, thank you. So again, we're hearing more about your work within your school, and you mentioned at the start that as a result of what's been happening, you've been you felt it's important to, and you've been invited to share these ideas and insights elsewhere, working with others. Tell us a bit about what you now are involved in, people you communicate with, or steps you've taken as a result of this kind of big change in your school, because I'm kind of interested in how ideas start to grow. They go from one place to many others.
So we've had over 50 senior leaders come and visit the school to come and have a look for themselves. I open the doors and welcome anyone who'd like to come and see. I think it's always good to see something in practice and explore it, go and ask questions. Most importantly, go and speak to the children, because most school leaders are quite good at giving a story. It's always great to speak to the children themselves. I'm now working with the International Forums of Inclusive Practitioners in pulling together a conference which will be taking place in October at the world's first Inclusion Congress, which is a really exciting development. And in doing this work, I've been speaking to people around the world. I was speaking to a colleague yesterday from Kenya who was telling me some really sad stories of homes that have very little in them, and you will walk into a living room and you will see 3 screens and people not connecting at all. And the same issues we're seeing here, the same concerns we have around addiction to screens and mobile phones, is playing out around the world. It's really interesting. The more people I speak to, the same issues. So I'm working with colleagues. We're pulling together this conference, and we're going to share experiences, not just from the UK, but from Africa, from Europe.
That's really interesting. So it's interesting when you've come across an issue that sort of resonates across the board like that. I can't immediately think of others that are similar. Is there anything so far you've picked up on that's different about the way that schools use or don't smartphones in those other parts of the world? Because I know we have listeners from all over with Teachers Talk Radio. Just kind of interested in that.
I mean, absolutely. There's been a big push around how, and UNESCO themselves, on the back of COVID, there were 4 pillars of things that they would do. One was they would really push to get technology into every hand. And this is where it isn't binary, because where you don't have access to a school, technology can give you access to education, can open a whole world of learning for children who otherwise couldn't have something. But I think somewhere along the line, there's been a disconnection, or people believing that the false promise that technology replaces human interaction and it can substitute a great teacher teaching in a lesson. And what I've found from speaking to these colleagues working in different parts of the world is that there's a huge status symbol around technology in the home. There's a huge status symbol in governments to say how many people have got access to them. Where there's kind of a lack of, I heard a story of a school that was sent iPads and it didn't have electricity. They didn't have basic medical supplies and they were being given iPads. And that's where you feel that there's a real difference there than what we're experiencing here. That is very different. Yes, the issue is the same, and yes, some of the things that they're facing are the same, but the government will, the kind of the feeling that technology is the great savior to everything, I think differs around the world.
Thank you. So I think maybe that's something that listeners might want to kind of revisit or raise questions about now or in future. So we've got a really strongly made case for being smartphone free, and then we've just got a few references to the role of technology in schools and I guess in places where funding is much more of an issue, conflating those two things. So smartphones might be a young person's only way of accessing kind of key information. I guess that does change things somewhat. Is there anything in particular you found frustrating to date in terms of what you've been doing in this sort of space in our school, so working around smartphone use? Do you have a big frustration at the moment?
Yeah, I feel that we work in a system and at a time where everybody is seeing something similar. As we said, there are a few things that people align on. We've got 70% of parents saying that they would be in favour of removing phones from schools. We've got 90% of schools saying that they have a ban, but it's not yet effective and they'd love to see it effective. You've got this huge swell, and if you speak to the Children's Commissioner did work with teenagers and said, what do you wish? What was the one thing you wish? And they were saying they wish they had their smartphones later and they wish they didn't have access to social media. I feel we have this huge consensus that we know phones are bad. We know that there is no good reason to have a mobile phone or a smartphone in schools. And yet there's something holding the government back. There's something holding the unions back from actually coming out and saying, let's make this law. Let's stop children having access to phones while they're in schools. And I think it's an open door. And I think the reasons for that are a huge frustration for me, because I think part of it is the role of big tech, not just in schools, in kind of all walks of our life. And that's a frustration.
We'll return to that in just a second before we move on to the final kind of section of tonight's show. But it's challenging actually interviewing tonight, because my views kind of resonate a lot, Jamie, with yours. In fact, I had this poignant moment this evening. So just say hypothetically, I may have a daughter who's, say, approaching year 7, so she may or may not be in year 6. And I'm trying to work out what to do in terms of whether to give her a smartphone or a dumb phone or no phone. And I think I'm going to ask Damien. I'm going to say, what advice would you give to this fictional parent of a year 6 student thinking about what to do? And my daughter said, well, the thing is, I would like to know what a sensible person would do, Daddy, because you use your phone too much. So I'd really appreciate some advice on that in a few seconds' time. Just a reminder that this tonight's show is brought to you by John Catt Educational, who publish a range of books and resources around great teaching and learning around the world. And you can get the chance to improve or inform your professional development today by visiting the website, which is johncattbookshop.com, to check out their full range of titles. And you can use the discount code JCTTR2425 to get 20% off your order. So, Damien, back to you. our fictional parent, have you got any advice for him or indeed her?
Well, this fictional parent you speak, I'm unsure if you've done an incredible amount of research, because I also know of a fictional parent who has a child who's just about to go into year 7, as a family facing exactly the same conversations across the dinner table. It's so hard when the vast majority of friends have a phone, when that child's wanting independence for the first time, and there's a huge amount of pressure. I think my advice is the first thing that we have done is spoken about social media, and spoken about the harms of social media and the reasons why they won't be having social media for till at least 16. This is where the vast majority of harm is caused, and social media is not a great thing. So we've had that conversation already. There are lots of phones coming on the market now that look like smartphones, that swipe like smartphones, or that act like them, but that do not have free access to the internet. And I think that's another potential risk of harm. The fact that a child aged 11 or 12 could have completely unfiltered, open access to the internet is a real concern.
So again here, and I welcome kind of comments or responses, and if people want to send messages after the show, we can look at counter arguments. But I know I've really been struck by this analogy that the way that we view access to internet and 11 and 12-year-olds now will be the same way that we in the future is the same as we look at giving young people free access to hard alcohol now. Like it's changing. Is that a good analogy, Damien, there, or am I missing?
No, I agree. I use the analogy of when you learn to cross the road. When you're teaching somebody to cross a road, you hold their hand and you walk with them and you talk to them and you are with them the whole time that they are crossing the road. What you don't do is you don't take them to the M4, put them in the middle of the M4 and wish them good luck and leave them there by themselves, which is what we're doing. And to give children completely unfiltered access at the very moment when their brains are telling them to push boundaries. They don't have a fully developed frontal lobe. They are still learning and they are still growing as human beings. And we know teenage years are difficult enough. So to expect them to show a level of restraint that the vast majority of adults cannot themselves show is just unfair. So I think we have a duty as adults to remove those threats, those risks, those temptations, all the things that a teenager will struggle with. So if I was giving advice, I would say that no social media, certainly no unfiltered access to the internet. And I also think there's something about the addictiveness of the device itself, and to have a device that isn't going to keep pinging and beeping and pulling them in every 2 minutes to its kind of addictive algorithm.
I think there's something there that sometimes gets missed, isn't there, about just the depth of lived experience when we're constantly distracted. There's an American social commentator, I can't remember her name, who talks about the rule of 3, which is when there's social groups together, provided 3 people in this group, say 5 or 6 people, and provided 2 or 3 of those 5 or 6 people are speaking with each other, the others can get out their phones without it causing any offence. And you can see it happening, like restaurants and when people are out in public. And then she goes on to explore the depth of conversation that this leads to, because things have to remain superficial. You don't happen to know who this is or any more on that, do you? Maybe it's just something I read elsewhere.
No, I haven't heard that before. I do know that when we had some roundtable debates and discussions with students, and they were reporting that they were using, one thing we were concerned about, if we took phone access away during the day, would they be up all night and be using their phones more in the evenings? And it was the opposite. They've reported that they use their phones less. Now that they've got that breaker in the day, they're using their phones less in the evening. And when we were talking to them about why that is, they were talking about the depth of conversation they now have is at a much deeper level, and that they're talking to friends, and some really lovely conversations were taking place where they were openly saying, I didn't know this about my friend, and we've never really spoken about that before because we've only really chatted online. And I think that the social norms around phones have changed, and where once upon a time it would have been rude to sit in a restaurant and take your phone out. If you sit down in any restaurant now and look around, the vast majority of people in that restaurant will either be sitting opposite each other, not speaking and looking at their phones, or they'll have the phone on the table, and it will be a constant source of distraction from the conversation that they're having with each other.
Thank you. So it's been really helpful to kind of explore both the pragmatic side of how you went about doing things and find out a bit more about the why. And as always on Teachers Talk Radio, we're keen to kind of explore the debate from as many angles as possible. And if you've been listening thinking, no, they're missing something crucial, or there's a counter argument or idea that really needs to be thought about, or maybe there's some unintended consequences that you think could occur as a result of this apparently sensible move, I'd be really keen to hear from you. Maybe we could get you onto a future show. So here we are, Damien, it's 2025, and you're talking quite passionately about running a school and one aspect of that, which is how you inform and shape young people's actions around use of technology. How did we get to here? Like, what's your story that brings you to this point? This is kind of the last section of our show now.
That's a very long story. I am my first job in schools was as a caretaker. I did a summer job where I was caretaking at my father's school. My dad was a head teacher before me, and I at the time swore blind I would never be like him. I would never work in schools, and that I was either going to be a professional footballer or a musician. And I left school and went to the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts and saw myself in a long and musical career ahead of me. And I think it was about 6 months into a tour that we were doing, which was with a troupe of dancers, and I was working as the lighting designer and operator, that I realized the showbiz glamour wasn't quite what it had set out to be. So I then looked at other roads and came into teaching through music.
So I'm assuming then teaching music, and then was that in a primary or secondary school context? Because I know you spent time in both.
Initially, it was at a weekend. It was a weekend job. I was teaching at a stage school, teaching music there, and then went to Liverpool University and did a Bachelor of Education at Chester College, and have spent the majority of my career in primary education, working with some of the youngest children, and then 5 years ago made the step to all through. So I now teach children from, our youngest is 3 months, and the school goes right up to 19 years old.
Okay, so, and was there a point at which you decided head teaching was the thing for you, or was that early on, late on? How did you get to where you are very specifically now?
I was really fortunate in my early career. I was a head teacher by the age of 30. I had worked with some really inspirational teachers, and I became an advanced skills teacher. I went and worked alongside a head teacher in a school that was really struggling, and we did some really great work in transforming the lives of the young people there. And the head at that school then left on in unexpected circumstances, and I was kind of thrust into a leadership position probably before I was expected to or was ready to. And then a year or so after that, I saw this wonderful opportunity to start a school from scratch, and it was a really unique and wonderful opportunity to grow a school from reception up. And yeah, I did that, and we were really successful.
And I think it's an interesting observation. So the similar thing came up in your answer earlier about the smartphone changes from the outside, what looks like a carefully planned career is one in which the person in it is just making the next choice each time. And then you look back and here you are. That's really interesting. And on Classroom Chronicles, we're kind of interested in the stories that we tell ourselves about what we're doing. So you obviously have a strong take on the role of leading and changing people's lives in schools. And normally in the stories we tell, we have particular nemesis or things that we encounter and have to take on or are challenged by, or sometimes fear being defeated by. Does this kind of resonate with you? Do you have particular nemesis that you've encountered in your career and maybe continue to?
So I think my biggest nemesis is yeah, that's a really good question. I suppose I think that the thing that's looming, which is both hugely exciting but hugely terrifying, is the role that AI is going to play in children's future. And I was at a conference in UNESCO a couple of weeks ago, and heard the head of the OECD talking, and he was talking about the cognitive ability of AI and where it currently is, and also the potential of where it's going to be in a few years' time. And I think that the thought that in the future, cognitive decisions and the cognitive load will be almost subcontracted out from humans to AI is fills me with a huge amount of concern about where we're heading with this. So yeah.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
Hi secondary school teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org.
Did you know that every year, half of disadvantaged children who are top attainers at primary school don't go on to achieve top GCSE maths results? At Axiom Maths, we exist to change that. Our fully funded program helps schools nurture young mathematicians through weekly face-to-face maths circles, where pupils tackle challenging and exciting problems outside the national curriculum. With just under £3,000 annual funding, expert training and quality resources, we give schools everything they need to inspire the next generation of mathematical thinkers. Want to make a difference? Visit axiommaths.com today and join over 400 schools delivering math circles across the UK.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy
At this event, sorry to interrupt you, because I've been listening to a couple of people speaking about this and have read a little into it myself, and I find that even the kind of industry leading experts, they don't know where it's going, and often they'll make this reference to, yeah, it could be awful. But did you hear the same?
No, I heard it was actually looking at AI's ability to comprehend a text is currently working at around a 16-year-old level, and within a year it will probably be working at a graduate level. And up until very recently, mathematics was one area that it wasn't as strong as comprehension in. it was struggling to make sense of some of the logical questions and therefore wasn't performing as highly. But yet the latest versions are now catching up with what it's doing in comprehension and being able to kind of decode language and things. So there was certainly a feeling that the AI is going to play a very real part in the future, and I think we're all seeing that anyway. But I think this is going to be. It's not just going to be the next interactive whiteboard. I don't think it's going to be something that sits on the periphery of learning and doesn't have a huge impact. I actually think the world in which we engage and interact will be different, and we're going to have to learn to live alongside it, and that brings up fear and concern, but also opportunity, and that's why I say it's both a concern and exciting.
So it's a big area of uncertainty and lots of possibilities. Perhaps we can revisit this in a future show. So we've heard a little bit about the big picture, an area that we're particularly interested in. We've thought a bit about current nemesis or area of concern, and there's this uncertainty about AI and how it's going to influence schooling and the world our young people live in the future. And then if I asked you to try and just pin down, what is it that you're doing in your role in education? How would you describe or frame that?
I think most people come into education for similar reasons, that you want to make a difference to people's lives. If I was to be pushed on what that means, I want to make sure that as many young people as possible have a really purposeful life, and that they have lots and lots of opportunities to do wonderful things. And that really sits at the heart of everything. The work that we're doing around smartphones is not because I feel this is the latest fad. I don't think this is going to blow over. I actually think if people engage in it, it will have a huge impact on the young people they work with. And it's the same in the school that I work in as well. I am passionate that we do something that makes a difference, that gives people agency, it gives them choice. It means that they will have a life that is purposeful, that they have lots of opportunities, and they make the choice about what happens next.
Thank you. That's a really concise and interesting to hear, because we all kind of frame our roles somewhat differently. But I think that focus upon what are we doing? We're going in to help young people find a purposeful way through life is a motivating one, isn't it? I wonder whether along the way, so in your kind of 20 years or so in school, have there been things or stories that you've once thought were important that you have now shifted or changed, or that you think, no, that wasn't quite right?
Yeah, I think when I was a very young leader, I used to try and divorce my work and professional persona from the person who I saw myself as outside of work. So I had the professional Damien inside of work, and then while I was outside of work with my friends, I was a very different character altogether, and felt that I was able to play social masks incredibly well. And I think that just showed a huge naivety about what leadership is. And for people to follow you, they need to know who you are authentically. They need to know what you believe in. They need to know what you stand for. And they need to connect with you as a human being and as a person. And if you're able to show that, if you're able to connect at that level, then you can lead. And without that, then you cannot be an effective leader. So I think that was one of the things that I used to believe and used to feel was very important to me, that I've since learned was completely wrong.
That's really interesting. I often go and end a show with something I have to think about more, and that's definitely one of those issues, is that decision about separating your professional and kind of outside self and the gains and risks there. But certainly what seems to be resonating in these kind of last couple of questions in particular is that there's a really close connection between what's important to you, Damien, as a person, and then what you spend your time doing. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think it has to be. You have to, if you are put in a really, I see myself as fortunate. I don't think in lots of my answers, you'll hear me say we were lucky because we tripped upon the right thing. You know, I've had a really fortunate career. I'm in a really fortunate position that I lead a wonderful team of people. And with that comes that responsibility, and I owe it to them to be genuine. I owe it to them to let them know who I am and what I believe in. And then that then gives everyone who's in my school that opportunity. Do they want to follow? Do they want to follow this leader and these things that he believes in, or do they not? And I think if leaders are open and authentic like that, then people will make that decision.
Thank you. And I think that's kind of brings us to a kind of neat end. So we often finish with a question, what keeps you going? So people have shared parables or vignettes or fables that kind of help them get up, and they've picked up along the way in their journey in schools. I'm getting from you a really strong sense of what keeps you going is you're trying to do good in the role you're in. And one of the ways to do that is to share that up front with people and see if they want to come along. Am I getting that right, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good, I mean, in terms of a parable, I really have been thinking deeply around Plato's parable of the cave, and this idea that you know in that parable it's about a group of people who are just looking at shadows, and they don't see the real light and the real world outside of the cave. They're just looking at the shadows of what could be. And I've really connected with that, with all the work that we've been doing around smartphones and the fact that people are distracted from the real world, from real human connection, and from the world beyond the cave, as it were, because of these devices, and that they've been attracted to them. And that's something that I've been working on in terms of how do we get this message to children? Because in lots of the work I've been doing to date, it's been all about data and numbers and facts and figures, and you don't teach children through data, number, facts, and figures. You teach them through stories. So I think that the story of the cave and this realization that if you're not careful, you experience life through a shadow is a really, really important one. And it's something that I'm looking at you know, I'm having a go at writing a children's story that will help explain that. And that's something I'm working on as a side project at the moment, but very closely connected to everything we're doing in
That's
school.
really interesting. And I wish I'd asked you that question earlier on, because one of our kind of core areas we like to explore on Classroom Chronicles is the shape of story and how it affects our understanding of the world. And I think there's a lot in that shadows story and metaphor. So hopefully we can maybe hear more from you in future when you've got a little more of that children's story kind of unpacked. So feel free to kind of let us know. So I think we've had quite a wide-ranging show tonight. So we've spoken first a few pedagogical questions, insights and questions generated from previous shows about homework and how complex schools are, and the idea that schools are storytelling factories resonated with you. It's interesting that kind of comes back at the end as well. We then spent some time, and I'm sure if listeners are keen to find out more, that they'd like it to be longer, but we spent some time thinking about very specifically in your current school, you went smartphone free with these lockable pouches, and the impact's been much greater and different than perhaps you expected, but it's something you'd wholeheartedly recommend. Then we've stepped back and talked about, well, how did we get to here? And it's been really interesting to hear your journey as a school leader and things that you're concerned about and the tales you've been told and how your view of leadership's changed over time. Firstly, did I miss anything there? If you think, all right, this strand is important to mention as well.
No, I'm impressed at your ability to recap and go over everything we've said. I fear I may have waffled for the last hour, so apologies if I've gone off on.
No, so I often think it's great to hear, just have a chance to hear a bit more from someone. I think, as you were saying, that kind of concept of the shadowy social media world, you don't get to get into the nuance. You don't get to hear the person behind those sort of headlines. And I'm sure a number of our listeners have seen the headlines about those smartphones, and the chance to hear what's kind of driven you to get there has been really interesting. I would like to flag up that, of course, we're keen to hear from others. If you were involved in running schools and you have a very different line, I'd love to hear more from you about that as well. But Damien, if people wanted to hear more from you or to kind of follow up if you've got questions or visit, perhaps what's the best thing they could do?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm obviously on X as well. But drop me a message and say hello. We welcome people all the time. So we would more than happily show people what we're doing. It's always great to speak to students, as I said earlier. So come and have a conversation with the children themselves and see what their experience has been like. But yeah, just drop me a message and say hello. And I have a quite distinctive surname, so I'm quite easy to find.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Damien Bibby. Thanks again to our sponsor, John Catt Education Publishers. And of course, a reminder that if you do want to kind of explore their catalogue of books, go to the website, John Catt, and you can get a discount if you use the code JCTTR2425 to get a 20% discount on their publications. I really appreciate the time you've given to us this evening, Damien. So thanks again for that. And we look forward to hearing more about this children's tale perhaps in future. That sounds like a really interesting line to explore. So thanks again for your time. And perhaps we'll be back on a show again soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And good night to our listeners. Feel free, if you have kind of questions, queries or comments, there's something we've missed, something you need to explore further, either the story theme or some of the claims that have been made around smartphones in schools, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can respond on Spaces or other social media to maybe give us things to revisit next time. Thanks again to all, and I wish you all a happy Wednesday evening. Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.